If you're an F1 fan like myself, you'll probably watch several different videos or listen to podcasts of people talking about ranking their favorite or their least favorite F1 drivers in the 2025 season. After watching a lot of those, I started to think to myself, what if I could create a data driven, objective way of creating a ranking like that? And yeah, after finding out based on my previous videos that there are people out there that are interested both in data and Formula One, I went out to find it out, and here's how that went. Before we start diving into the details of the process and the ranking itself, let me just make my goal here very clear. I want to rank the F1 2025 drivers as objectively as possible. I'll try to make everything that I present to you here based around data, making clear when I'm expressing a personal opinion. And how I figure to go about things is creating a score for each driver, and I'll explain exactly how I did that. And that score will in turn be used to create a ranking that I will show at the end of the video. Okay? Okay, let's go. So before we start talking about the scores themselves, first I must explain to you what I did. And what I try to do is basically use my work experience to treat this as a data science project. And as broad of a meaning as that might have, I'll talk a little about everything that I did so you can have a clear picture of what I'm talking about. So, to get started, first we need some data. And that comes from the Jolpica F1 API, an amazing open source project that I got all my data from. What I do is extract the data by downloading it from the database into my computer. But at this point, the data is just basically a bunch of tables that by themselves don't have any real meaning. So, what I do then is, through using their database documentation, I transform this data using Python so I can actually get usable information. Finally, what I can do is load this Strata data into a Jupyter notebook, which is usually my tool of choice when doing data analysis and exploration. I mean, it gets a little more complicated than this workflow that I'm showing you here if we go into too much detail, but this is basically the process of creating analysis that you are about to see in this video. And what I just showed you is usually referred to as an ETL pipeline, since it comprises of extracting, transforming, and loading data. And all of this that we're doing can also be referred to as some kind of data engineering for the project. Okay, but where's the data science in all of this? Well, remember when I said that I get raw data and that I have to transform that into usable information? This process by itself is called feature creation or feature engineering. It gets the name from the fact that we call the individual information that we generate features. Let me show you a simplified example. It gets a little more complicated than this, but in practice, you get the idea. Imagine that there's a dataset that shows you the quality time for each driver in each round. What I can then do with this dataset is manipulate it so I get the quality win rate versus a teammate for each of the drivers. And there we go, we have our first feature, which would be the win rate. And then what I do from there is the same process for different types of information, creating different features, so that eventually this collection of features becomes what we call a feature store, which in turn we can use to analyze the values by themselves, but mostly to create algorithms, machine learning, and AI models to infer or predict something that we want. Okay, that's cool and all, but how is the score actually created? Let's first take a look at the actual values of the feature that I was just explaining to you, and we'll go from there. Here are the actual values for each driver's win rate against their teammates in qualifying. You can see how Verstappen and Alonso are tied for the highest win rate percentages, having been outqualified by their teammates only once in the season. And you can also see how the win rate of two different teammates should sum up to 1. This is obvious given the definition of a win rate. But there are exceptions to this case, for example with Lawson and Hajar, and also for Verstappen and Tsunoda, because the teammates were soft mid-season. But anyways, the point of me showing you this feature right here is to both explain how such a feature analysis would work, but also to show you a feature that is quite simple and direct to understand. On the other hand, we might have a different kind of feature. This feature right here is a comparison between a driver's median pace and the pace for the rest of the field. I'm dividing one over the other to get a ratio between the driver's pace and the average grid pace. But anyways, my point here is, what can you gather from this chart right here? Pretty much nothing. Different to the win rate feature, this is much more complicated to understand. And now comes some more data science magic. And oh boy, here I go talking about normalization again. But don't worry, this is a different kind of normalization than the ones I have talked about in my previous videos. This time we will be using a z-score normalization, which I will get to in a second. But first, I need to explain to you my idea. Well, when I started to make this video, I thought of two main approaches to create this analysis. One would be through the creation of a machine learning model, which I will use to train using historical data and try to use its output to create some kind of score. But after trying different approaches and researching a little bit about possible approaches to this problem, I decided that this would be, as we usually say in the data field, the equivalent of trying to use a bazooka to kill a fly. In other words, definitely not the right tool for the job, and being too complicated to get a consistent result, and probably worse off than the second approach. I would probably blow up the whole room, but the fly would still be alive. On a second attempt, I thought of creating a more algorithmic, or maybe you can call a deterministic approach, meaning that I would create a process by hand that would create the same score for a given driver every single time we do the calculations. And I quickly realized that this was a more appropriate method of doing this. The idea here is that each feature, at which I will go through in a minute, would carry a score. So I ended up creating a score system where each feature would represent a layer of a score that would eventually become the driver's final score. In this system, the driver that had the best performance in a given feature would receive a perfect score of 10, and the worst performing driver in that feature would receive a 5. The idea behind this range of 5 and 10 is first because I consider every F1 driver to be among the best drivers in the world. So in a psychological way, it doesn't feel right to attribute the score of 0 to someone, but also to not completely spread out the results when taking a look at it later. And trust me, it's already pretty spread out. And to do all of this, we have normalization technique at its core. Let's take any given feature and ignore the values for now and even what it is. Just think of it as any distribution of values for different drivers. What I do with that is apply what is called the z-score normalization, defined by getting each value of the distribution, which is defined by x, and then I subtract the mean value of the distribution from that, and then I divide the result by the standard deviation. What this does is assure me that every single feature distribution will be within a reasonable range, and that extreme outliers, like Verstappen on pretty much every single teammate comparison feature, will be treated within reason, make every single distribution centered around 0. But as a downside, this can actually make the values even harder to interpret. So finally, to turn this into an interpretable score, I apply a second technique called the min-max scalar, which will take this normalized distribution and put it between 5 and 10, giving a 10 for the best performer and a 5 for the worst. In other words, I can take this feature that I showed you before, that is not easy at all to interpret, and turn it into this. Look. It's the exact same feature, but it went through the process that I just explained to you. So now we can clearly see the best drivers in terms of pace versus field, and actually interpret the chart. So after creating a process that I was pretty comfortable with, I started creating other features. Feel free to pause the video and take a look at some of them. And if you are interested in more detail and want to check all of them out, check my GitHub link in the description for the code and the notebook where I did all of the calculations so you can understand each one in further detail. Anyways, I ended up creating 25 different features and divided them into 3 different categories, taking inspiration on how athletes are usually scored in video games. I wanted to create an attention reliability feature category as well, but the data was simply not good enough on DNF information and collisions, etc., so I ended up settling on these 3. On pace, we have basically features that I derive from lap time statistics, be that consistency or pure speed. On performance, we have features that are derived from race and championship results. And on experience, we have features that are derived from career statistics. The idea behind these features is to try to measure a driver's quality from different angles. And while trying to isolate the car from the driver in the head-to-head comparisons, I also kind of accept that the fact that isolating completely the car from the driver is both futile and practically impossible in modern F1. So I also create features that compare the driver to the rest of the field as a whole as well. But I recognize that the car is as important, if not more, than the driver in modern F1 when it comes to the overall results. So what I ended up doing in the code behind the calculations, I added a little extra weight on the calculations to features that compared the stats against teammates, and I removed a little bit of the weight on pure result features. For example, an overall finishing position will have a little less weight than a quali head-to-head win feature, for example. So, After creating a score for each category by averaging the individual feature scores, what I also did is created as a weight for each one of the categories. The idea here is to favor pure pace more, which in my opinion is the category that is most dependent on the driver and also the most important one in racing as a whole, followed by performance and finally experience. I gave experience a little less of a weight because it doesn't matter if you are experienced enough if you have poor pace and performance. Okay, and when you combine all of the different scores using the respective weight, we get finally the driver's final score. Okay, that's enough rambling, let's get to the scores. And now, I will go by team from last to first in the 2025 championship, present to you the driver scores. And while I'll do that, I'll give my humble opinion on each one of them. Okay, let's go. Okay, and now we're starting off with Alpine, a team that had a dismal year in 2025. First off, we have our dear Franco Colapinto, which unfortunately is one of the worst scores you will see in this video of 6.3. Not really getting a good score in any of the categories. Meanwhile, the Frenchman Pierre Gasly was able to show a really good score of 7.7, excelling in every single teammate comparison and getting all of Alpine's 22 points. And I mean, for Alpine, I think at the end of the day, I kind of agree with the scores. I don't really think Franco had a good season. Maybe he'll show his true potential in 2026. And Pierre, I think, is really making a lemonade from those dry Alpine lemons. And also for Alpine, we have Jack Doohan. Remember him? And yeah, he got fired after 6 races, unfortunately, and he has the worst score of all. And I'm not sure if I even should include him in the overall comparison, since it's really a smaller sample size and not really comparable to what we're doing here. But yeah, just thought it was worth mentioning. Okay, so moving on. Next up, we have Sauber, or Stake F1 team, whatever, having a more evenly matched driver lineup. Starting off with my fellow Brazilian Gabriel Bortoleto, getting a kind of impressive score of 6.99. He did this first of all by not getting completely dominated by his teammate, but also he really achieved good scores on lap time consistency features, with that being reflected on his pace score. And now, for podium achiever Nico Hülkenberg, I mean, he got what I would call a just score. I was kind of expecting higher, but at the end of the day, I mean, he was better than Bortoleto for sure, given that Bortoleto is a rookie, but not by an absurd margin. And yeah, I think that is in line with what I saw during the season, and to be honest, I agree with the ratings for the Stake F1 team. Okay, now moving on to Haas F1 team. Starting off with another rookie, Oliver Behrman. And to be honest, I think this was the first and one of the few, or maybe the only, score the algorithm spit out that I kind of was surprised slash kind of disagreed with. I expected a better score from what I watched in 2025, but what really got his score down was that he had really bad scores on almost all of the lap time consistency features. And yeah, I mean, it is what it is. I was honestly expecting a better score from Oliver Behrman. Then we have Esteban Ocon. And I don't mean to be a hater, but I think these scores are the other way around. Esteban was able to have a higher score than his teammates by being more consistent and having more experience as well. But in my personal opinion, from what I watched in F1 in 2025, I think Oliver Behrman deserved a higher score than Esteban. Okay, now moving on to Aston Martin. Starting off with Stroll with one of the lowest scores that we'll see in this video. And then we have Big Daddy Alonso with the highest scores we've seen so far. I agree with this. Okay, now moving on to Racing Bulls. Starting off with Liam Lawson with a meh score. I mean, he had a rocky start and got swapped in the third round of the season. And given everything that happened, I think this is pretty fair, actually. Hopefully, again, maybe he will be able to show his full potential next year. And now moving on to the rookie Isaac Hedger with an amazing score, especially given the fact that he's a rookie, with really excelling in the performance department. And for racing rules, I kind of agree with these scores. Maybe I would just note that I think Hedger's score was also like probably helped given the fact that his teammate is not as experienced as other rookies' teammates. But I mean, he had a great season, like a great debut season nonetheless, and yeah, a deserving score for I think both drivers. Okay, now moving on to the fifth place in the 2025 championship, we have Williams, a team that I would consider to have a pretty good lineup and a team that is overall, I think, on the rise. First off, we have Alexander the Great Albon getting what I would call a pretty reasonable score of 7.05, a score that unfortunately is lower than his teammate, the also great Carlos Sainz, getting a pretty good score of 7.75. And for Williams, I also think that I agree with these scores as well. I think that sometimes Sainz did extremely better than expected, given that he is in a Williams at his debut season there, even. And I also think that I expected more of Albon sometimes during the season. And yeah, I think this reflects on their scores. And yeah, overall, I think those scores were fair to the Williams drivers. Okay, now moving on to the fourth place in the Constructors' Championship of 2025, we're getting to the top teams, starting off with Ferrari. Oh, sweet Ferrari. What have you done to this man? Does he look happy to you? Look, I'm not happy to say this, but Hamilton got a score of 7.69. And this is pure reflection of the really bad season that he had, and I'll leave it at that. Meanwhile, we have Hampton Boy over here, who's definitely more used to the Ferrari BS, and was able to actually achieve one of the highest scores, the highest that we've seen so far. And yeah, I mean, for Ferrari, I think I agree with these scores. I wish Hamilton's was a little higher, yeah, but this would be purely based on personal opinion because I really think that as a driver lineup, Ferrari has the best driver lineup of current F1. And yeah, I really wished that this would have been reflected on the data. But yeah, unfortunately, it didn't because Hamilton had a really, really rough season. Okay, now moving on to the big bad Red Bull. Starting off with, oh man, poor Yuki. I mean, there's no other way around it. He got completely massacred in that Red Bull, getting the lowest score of all, apart from Jack Doohan, which I'm not even sure if I should include on the list. And on the other hand, while Yuki achieved the lowest score we've seen, here comes Big Daddy Supermax with the highest score we've seen so far by a lot. And I don't really think I need to dig very deep into this. Max got basically amazing scores on all feature categories, and by completely dominating his teammate, he got a score of 9.45. And at the end of the day here, in summary, I think Max's score was really helped out by Yuki, and Yuki's score was really screwed because of Max. And now, moving on to the second place of the 2025 Constructors' Championship, we have Mercedes. Starting off with the second score that I initially kind of disagree with, but I don't know, man. Kimi Antonelli got a score of 6.57, and I mean, I don't know. I really think that, as my personal opinion, I really think that Kimi is better than a 6.5 rated driver. Like, I really do. But at the same time, he's in a top team with a very consolidated and very good teammate. And maybe I expected also a little more from him, especially given the hype that was around him before the season started. And yeah, I don't know what to make of this. And now for his teammate, the loved and also hated Big George Russell, getting an absolutely fantastic score, being one of the highest scores of 2025, with an excellent performance and pace scores, excelling especially in lap time consistency and winning against his teammates on pretty much every head-to-head metric. After really thinking about the scores for these Mercedes drivers, and I think I kind of agree with them. I mean, for George, it really didn't surprise me. He's a great driver, and I really hope that in 2026, both Red Bull and Mercedes have a really, really good car so they can compete against each other. And because I think George is one of the best competitors that Max could have. And for Kimi, I really think this is a more of a case of being in a top team with a really good teammate and being a rookie in a place that is already way ahead of you. Okay, Moving on to the great championships of 2025 McLaren, starting off with the Aussie Oscar Piastri, getting a score of 7.9, which is a really solid score, but maybe I expected a little more. He got really good pace score, a little less on the performance score, but yeah, him being that not that experienced brings his score a little more down, and I think if anything, these performances and pace score really show his future potential. And now, for the champion of the 2025 World Drivers' Championship, we have the loved and also hated Lando Norris, getting a better score than Oscar with a pretty solid 8.24. And for these McLaren scores, I would maybe argue that I kind of expected higher scores from both, but not by much. I mean, like maybe 0.3 higher for both. But again, I feel like sometimes during the season I also expected more from both of them. So yeah, I really think these scores reflect what maybe we watched in the 2025 season. And yeah, that's it. I mean, that's the score for every driver in 2025. And just before we finish the presentation and the video, let's take a look at a list with everyone's scores for each category, and then we can take a look at the consolidated scores as well and get the full picture of the drivers. Oh man, these animations are getting out of hand. Okay. Starting with the performance score, we have Max with the highest, being surprisingly closely followed by George, and then we have Charles and Alonso, with Lando also being able to get in the top 5. And when I look at this chart, I really think that the top 4 especially are a reflection of the combination of being really good drivers, but also surpassing their teammates by a relatively big margin. While Lando, on the other hand, for example, is a really good driver, but did not outperform his teammates nowhere near the level of the top 4, and you can argue for the reason why that is. And I think when looking at this chart, I can also point out the really good scores achieved by Hedger and Gasly, really closely following Norris. Now, when looking at the score for pace, the first 3 remain the same, being surprisingly close together, but now they're followed by the McLaren boys, that both had really similar results. And I find this really interesting, and I also really agree with it. This made me really happy to see this in this chart. And also, another thing that made me kind of happy was seeing Sainz here to wrap up the top 5, which was a nice surprise. I really like Sainz, and I think that he was really able to show that he's a great driver in that Williams. And now, for the final score, we have the experience score. And I mean, this really shouldn't come much of a surprise. On the first place, we have the guy who won 105 Formula 1 races and is a 7-time world champion, followed by the guy who has had more than 400 races and is a 2-time world champion, who's in turn followed by the guy who's in line to break all of these records. And when looking at the experience score, what I found really interesting is that how much of the top 3 drivers are really ahead of the rest. And this is because I'm not just taking the number of races into account. I'm also using, with a lesser rate given to these other features, podiums, pole positions. When I looked at this for the first time, I really debated if I should keep all of these features in the combined experience score, or if I really should simplify it and just use the number of races, but I ended up on deciding to keep everything. And this really goes to show how these top 3 are really far away from the rest of the grid in terms of career achievements. Yeah, that's it for the experience score, and when we combine those 3, we finally get the final driver score. And this is what it looks like. I mean, you've already seen the list. Being honest with you, I agree with the top 5, and overall I think I agree with the ranking. So yeah, that's it everyone. Thank you so much for watching if you've made it this far. It was at the same time really fun but also really challenging to create this video, and as always took way longer than I anticipated. And yeah, comment down below what you thought, if you agree or disagree with the scores, if you have any suggestion on what I should adjust or what I should do in the future. But yeah, thank you for watching, and I hope to see you again soon. Bye!